Hello, art friends. My name is Fleshwad, and today I'm going to be reading you 2 stories about the black-eyed children from the subreddit r/no-sleep. Make sure to watch this video in the dark or at night and with your headphones on. Our first story is called I Know Where the Black-Eyed Children Come From. When I was a little kid, my little brother and I visited my grandparents in Tahlequah, Oklahoma every summer. It was a pretty boring town. As the capital of the Cherokee Nation, most recreational activities were related to the culture and history of the Cherokees. The last summer we spent there, I was 11. That age between wanting so badly to be seen as a teenager, but still finding enjoyment in Bratz dolls. My brother was 8 and wouldn't settle down unless he had his Nintendo DS. I didn't dread visiting my grandparents like many children do. Other than the cultural shock that came from leaving our home in LA to the relatively small Oklahoma town, I loved spending time with my grandparents, and so did my brother. They spoiled us with toys and ice cream. On a Thursday afternoon, my little brother and I were playing at the elementary school across the street from my grandparents' house. If you've ever been to Oklahoma, you probably know how quickly the weather can change. It's not uncommon for it to snow one day and be in the 70s the next day. This day went from sunny to cloudy, extremely quick. It didn't begin raining or lightning, so my brother and I continued to play, but these weren't normal clouds. They looked heavier and thicker. They were almost black. I'm still not sure if the clouds were some sort of warning for what was about to happen, or if I'm just trying to connect things. A girl who was probably 9 or 10 showed up at some point. She didn't have parents with her, but it was a fairly safe town and not uncommon for kids to walk around. She introduced herself as Allie. She was blonde and blue-eyed, but began enlightening us with the old Cherokee ghost tales. With Tahlequah being the capital of the Cherokee Nation, many urban legends in other towns are actually true in Tahlequah. Most people's great-great-grandmas really were Cherokees, and the school playground we were currently playing on really had once been an Indian burial ground. She told us one particularly grotesque story about the Deer Lady, who was a heartbroken woman that went insane and cut her legs off and stitched deer's legs onto her torso in place. Her final story inspired what we thought would be a fun adventure. She told us a chief's 15-year-old daughter had been brutally murdered by her white husband on their anniversary for flirting with another man. They buried her and out of respect never removed her gravestone when the school was built. Allie told us it would take a bit of maneuvering, but there was a panel that could be removed and we could crawl underneath the school and see the gravestone. We were all in shape, so we began our adventure. To our disappointment, the panel had been screwed shut, and it began to rain. My brother and I decided to go home. Allie, however, insisted that there had to be another way in. I tried to tell her her parents would probably be worried and that it would be best for her to go home too, but she was determined to find a way in. My brother and I went into my grandparents' house and changed into some dry clothes, drank Kool-Aid and watched TV. While my brother and grandparents were watching The Fairly Odd Parents, I noticed I could still see Allie, drenched in the rain, trying to find a way underneath the school from the living room window. Eventually she did. I watched her crawl in, but I never saw her crawl out. We sat through an entire episode of The Fairly Odd Parents and half an episode of Drake and Josh, so it had to have been 45 minutes. That night I had trouble sleeping. I told myself she had to have come out a different way, or maybe she came out when I wasn't looking, and finally drifted off. The next morning I woke up refreshed. I was certain Allie had found a way out. My grandparents took us to the carnival and to Brahms, the local ice cream shop. It was 6 o'clock in the evening when we got home, and my grandma began cooking supper, while my grandpa took a nap. My brother and I were kids though, and still had a lot of energy left, so we went across the street to play some more, and our grandma told us she would call us when supper was ready. I told my little brother that I had seen Allie go underneath the school and asked him if he was up for an adventure. He agreed, and I went to the panel that I saw Allie loosen. I loosened and crawled underneath the school, and my brother followed. The reaming daylight flooded into the basement along with us, providing us with just enough light to see things directly in front of us. The ground was cold, wet dirt, and there were many pipes and old basketballs to crawl around. I immediately spotted 8 to 10 headstones though. The first one was directly to the right of my brother and I, but the name was too faded to read. I was feeling kind of creeped out that Allie had been right and we were crawling over a bunch of dead bodies. I probably would have left, but my brother didn't seem afraid at all, and I wanted to seem braver than him. So I crawled to the next stone. This one read Andrew Cummings, and had a birth date of 1890 and a death date of 1902. There was one to the left that read Allison Cummings and had a birth date of 1893 and a death date of 1902 also. This freaked me out even more and made me think of Allie, who had the same name and looked about the same age as the dead girl several feet below me. My brother suddenly shouted, "Look, something in the corner just moved." Before I could tell him that we should leave immediately, he shoved me out of the way and began crawling incredibly fast to the corner further from us. I could clearly see a couple of large figures moving, but couldn't make out much else. "They're probably just dogs, let's go," I told him. But as he crawled, I crawled right behind him, getting closer and closer to the larger figures that began to look more and more like silhouettes of 3 people, sitting against a wall, all with their knees to their chest. When they came into clear view, my brother turned around and crawled underneath me. I held him close to my chest. We were both terrified. The first girl was clearly Allie, except she didn't look as lively as she did yesterday. She wasn't smiling and her hair was stringy. Next to her was a boy who looked close in age to me and had no hair at all. He wasn't smiling either. Then there was a girl who looked more normal than Allie or the boy. Her skin was dark and her hair was so long it bunched up at the ground. She looked like she was about 16, but her facial expression was the scariest. It was one of absolute despair. The scariest part about all of them was their eyes. I could see my brother's eyes glowing, but none of their eyes glowed. It didn't even really look like they had eyes, just pits of darkness. Allie smiled and said, "Thank God you guys came." The other 2 laughed. Yeah, well, we're going to be leaving now," I said, trying my hardest to sound casual, not scared. All 3 laughed and the other girl spoke up. "No, you're not." Her voice had a confidence that mine didn't. I pushed my brother in the direction we came in and he began quickly crawling away. I heard my grandma calling out to us and called out to her to help us. All 3 suddenly stopped laughing. Allie suddenly looked scared. She said, "Leave right now and never tell a soul you saw us. You got lucky." We didn't have to be told twice and quickly crawled out. At dinner that night, my brother and I chalked up our silence to it having been a long day and us being tired. We never played at the playground across the street again and rarely talked about the incident. 5 months after we left, my grandparents were murdered in their own home. A neighbor had said she had seen my grandma let 3 children into their home the day of the murder. A bald boy, a blonde girl, and a dark-haired girl. Cops were never able to find any leads and the case was eventually closed. Neither my brother nor I plan to visit Tahlequah or even Oklahoma ever again. but I know that it doesn't matter. I'm certain that one day they'll show up on my step too. I know I'll tell them to go away, and I can only hope that that will be enough. Our second story is titled "Two Kids Came by My House Last Night." I live in Japan and have lived here for a long time now. My town is pretty rural. There's less than 3,000 people, and I know a lot of them by this point. I especially know all the children because I've taught most of them since they were little. Last night, I got home from work late and was getting ready for bed. I generally get to sleep early, but with my busy day, it was almost midnight by this point. As I was turning off the lights, I started hearing knocking at my door. It wasn't especially loud, like someone was pounding to get in, but instantly my stomach knotted up with anxiety. It was just a consistent knock, 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 at even intervals. I chalked my anxious response up to tiredness, because while rare, it wasn't unheard of for my drunk coworkers to drop by, wanting to hang out after they got out of late meetings or other events. Generally, I'd have some warning, them yelling, messages before they showed up, or sloppy use of my doorbell, but maybe this time they were just being weird. Either way, I decided I'd tell them I was too tired to hang out tonight, and I grabbed my sweater to put on over my PJs before answering the door. As I stepped down to open the door, I felt another wave of fear in my stomach, but then pushed open the door anyway. Standing on my porch were two kids, both elementary age, judging by their height, holding hands. They were dressed normally, but inadequately, because it's still winter here, and there's a lot of snow even now, in sneakers, jeans, and black hoodies. The hoods were pulled up, and though I couldn't see their faces perfectly, I was pretty sure that I had never seen them before. They immediately set off warning bells. Kids, I didn't know this late at night? I asked them, in Japanese, if they were all right. "Yes, we're fine. Please let us in. We need to call our parents," the taller one responded. His voice was calm and quiet, and his response was very polite. The shorter one just continued gazing at me, not moving. I hesitated. It was definitely cold outside, and I was regretting not wearing any socks, just standing in the doorway. But most teachers are well aware that you never have unsupervised kids in your house, unless there's an emergency. But it was almost midnight. Maybe this time should be an exception? "What's wrong? Where are your parents?" I asked them, not willing to let them in. The feeling of dread was growing, but I wasn't going to just abandon some kids outside in the snow. "They're close by. Just let us in. We need to call them." Again, that patient, polite tone, but now the tall child's voice had started to get slightly louder. I looked past them, out into the night, but couldn't see anyone else around. Where had they come from? I decided I wasn't going to let them in. Something felt terribly, horribly off, and even if I was a jerk for making elementary school students stand outside, I couldn't ignore that feeling. "How about this? I'll go get my jacket and I'll walk you to the fire station, okay?" I proposed, knowing that it was just around the corner and the entire path there was well lit. I started to take my hand off the door to let it swing closed while I went to grab my things, but before I could, the taller child spoke again. "No, you will let us in, and we will use your phone," the older child responded again, His voice was firmer, louder, still overly polite, and when I had taken my eyes from them while I glanced around, looking for a jacket in my entrance room, it seemed like they had gotten closer. I could now see them both smiling, though the rest of their faces were still shadowed by hoods. I felt like I was choking or drowning and my brain was freezing up. Both kids' gazes were burning into me and I could feel their tension, excitement. My head swam and my arm, against my panic, had started pushing the door wide open again. "What do you want?" I gasped out, this time in English because the words just couldn't come to me in Japanese. "We just want to come in." This response snapped me out of it because instead of the formal Japanese the child had been using, the taller boy's answer was in perfect, clear English. As he said it, they both took a simultaneous step forward closer to me, and my porch light finally illuminated all of their faces. They looked like elementary school students, as I had initially guessed, and I indeed didn't know them. What pushed me over the cliff into full-on panic was their eyes. They were a solid, deep black. And as they saw me draw back into fear, their grins grew even wider. Together, in simultaneous motion, they extended the hands that they didn't have linked, like they were reaching out to me. It felt like I was wading through water, but I pushed the door shut and locked it. I then ran around the apartment making sure all of my windows were locked, even though there would be no reason for them to be unlocked at this time of year. The knocking started up again. The same knock, knock, knock. No louder or faster than before I had answered the door. I started frantically calling my boyfriend repeatedly until he woke up, and then begged him to come over, in tears at this point. He was at my house at most 10 minutes later, but by then the knocking had stopped, and the kids were nowhere to be seen. I told him what had happened as best as I could, and we looked outside. There were my footprints in the snow from where I'd come and gone during the day, his from when he had arrived. What sent me into another bout of panicked crying were the 2 sets of small prints that led from the street up to my door, but none leaving. My boyfriend just shook his head, tight-lipped, when I asked him if he knew what this was. All he would say was, "I'm glad you didn't let them in." I'm not going to stay at my house tonight, but eventually I will have to again. The lack of departing footprints terrifies me. No sleep. What do I do? And that was 2 separate stories of the black-eyed children. I hope I creeped you guys out at least a little bit, and I hope you enjoyed the story as well as the art. I hope this makes you think twice before answering your door to strangers. Special thanks to my patron Onirofon for supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel and get your own shout out, make sure to visit my Patreon link down below to find out how. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!